Most people understand that our politicians can be compromised, but just how bad is the problem?
Court documents say hundreds of powerful men may have bought sex in Virginia and Boston in the past 3 years, including politicians.
The D.C. madam has a lot of people asking a lot of questions.
For decades now, Americans have tolerated our politicians having extramarital affairs. Bill Clinton even enjoyed a over 50% approval rating through much of the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
But then something happened that changed everything.
Jeffrey Epstein's
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
And Jeffrey Edward Epstein.
We learned that Jeffrey Epstein, a man who was invited to the Clinton White House 17 times, who had personal relationships with multiple presidents, senators, movie stars, scientists, and foreign heads of state, was one of the most prolific sex offenders this country had ever seen. And then, just like the D.C. madam a decade before him,
Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Epstein took his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City facing charges of sex trafficking.
And then the cover-up began, a multi-year operation that encompasses both political parties. And all those who go to Washington promising answers for the American people become part of that same cover-up they promised to expose.
Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?
Himself. There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
But why is it limited? Because the search warrant for Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan residence the night of his arrest did not include a seizure warrant. So all the evidence seen by the FBI was only photographed. The FBI left, came back 2 days later, and all of the evidence was removed, including a tub of hard drives with evidence tape around them. Evidence tape that Epstein applied, not the FBI. Additionally, the raid on his infamous pedophile island did not happen until 5 weeks after his arrest. And we can see in drone footage taken by a private citizen over Epstein's island that during this 5-week period, there was a massive cleanup operation on the island, including the remodeling of the interiors of the buildings. Ironically, the same room that we see the FBI in is the same room that we can see a remodel take place. In fact, the FBI agents in this room could probably smell the fresh paint from the remodel that had just happened. So the raid on his island and his New York residence were both shams. His other 3 residences in the United States, Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, his house in Ohio, and his house in Palm Beach, were never raided. To this day have not been raided by the FBI. So you know how in the movies, when you see someone get taken down and their house and their place of business and their friend all get raided simultaneously within minutes of each other? Well, that's not what happened with Epstein. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Epstein's employees, while he was already in jail, were allowed to conduct a massive cleanup operation and destroy evidence. So much of what's in the Epstein files that people have been screaming at the government to release is evidence that Epstein allowed to be collected. And the fact that you're likely hearing this from me, some random YouTuber, for the first time, and you've never heard this from the mainstream media, that should tell you something. That should tell you just how compromised not only our politicians are, but how compromised the people who work in media are, the people who own the television stations, the newspapers, the magazines, the everything. The only precedent for such a willful lack of justice that I can find is when the Iran-Contra affair first broke. The Attorney General and the FBI failed to secure Colonel Oliver North's office for 4 days, allowing him and his secretary, 80s bombshell Fawn Hall, to destroy many of the documents related to Iran-Contra. So much so that today we still don't know the full scope of the affair. So what's my point with all this? Well, I think it's clear that since we're looking at the biggest cover-up and perversion of justice in America in over 40 years, that should show us just how corrupt our politicians are, how compromised they are. It should show us how corrupt our justice officials are, the FBI, everyone. This guy, Jeffrey Epstein, clearly had blackmail material on some of the most powerful people in our country. But hey, Epstein's now gone, right? Nothing to worry about. Our politicians won't be compromised anymore because Epstein's dead. Well, here is Congressman Tim Burchett talking about the problem of blackmail, specifically sexual blackmail, in Congress.
Here's the way it works. It's the way it's worked in the past. The Russians even have a name for it, the honeypot. You're overseas. You're being told how great you are. You're sitting at a bar and they know what you're into, guys, gals, combination thereof, drugs, whatever, and they'll hook you up, and you're thinking you're the stud. Your wife's away. Nobody will know halfway around the world. You end up sleeping with somebody, and then you're out. Next day, you're flying back to America. You're back front row at the church. And then you're getting ready to make a key vote, and somebody comes up and whispers in your ear, "Hey, man, were you in a motel room with a girl in Istanbul or something?" And you think, "Oh, crap." He goes, "Man, we don't want that out." And he goes, No, we don't. We're not going to put that out. He says, "If you can help us on this little bill, though, it always gets covered up, and everything gets covered up, and then somebody owns you. That's compromise." That'll be the title of my book if I ever write a book. Tim Burchett's Compromised Washington.
This guy's not a nobody. He is a United States congressman. He's one of the only real members of Congress that we have. And he's telling you there are politicians out there who are being controlled by nefarious actors. Politicians who, after one night in a foreign hotel room, are owned for life. And there are foreign intelligence services who train women agents in the art of seduction to be used as honeypot agents. Shawn Ryan just interviewed a former Russian honeypot named Aliia Roza, and she goes into great detail on the training and the techniques that they use to entrap these men.
They would never call it sex espionage. They would never call it honey trap. I understood it only after. But they said that's a special program which will help you to target those, criminals or people whom will be your task. Mm-hmm. So every day for a few hours, we would study these subjects, such as psychological techniques. So, for example, manipulation techniques, seduction techniques, influence, persuasion techniques, how to read and scan people, how to spot the lie, how to set up a strategy for your target, like this social engineering thing, like how to do it, how to work in a team, how to estimate your target's weaknesses and desires and needs, how to recruit someone, how to make friends, how to attract people, how to make someone to be your informer, again, through manipulation, how to threaten people, your targets, particular, so they would want or they have to give you information you need.
This honeypot or honey trap technique is primarily used by the Russians and Chinese. The story being that human life isn't worth as much in these countries and human rights protections aren't as high as they are in the United States. So, for example, in the United States, we have someone like Jeffrey Epstein, who is essentially a freelancer. He's, on paper, a private citizen, but he does, sell this information that he gets to intelligence services. But he doesn't receive a, W-2 paycheck from the Central Intelligence Agency that can be verifiably tracked to the agency, giving us a little bit of plausible deniability. And the Chinese have become incredibly prolific with this honeypot technique in America. There are brothels busted all the time run by Chinese nationals who are catering specifically to politicians and people of great power and influence in the U.S.
Elite clients of high-end brothel busted in Washington, D.C., unmasked as feds seek to charge 28 people with buying sex. The 28 are believed to be made up of elected officials, government contractors with security clearances.
And again, this brothel was run by Chinese nationals, likely passing compromising material on these politicians to the Chinese government. And these honeypot agents don't just focus on blackmail material. They also use their seduction techniques to get men to unknowingly give up state and other secrets. Here is Aliia Roza telling us exactly how this works.
So, as a former honey trap agent, I can tell you that men are the most vulnerable during intercourse. And if you are quite experienced agent, you can ask certain questions during or after the intercourse, like straight after the ejaculation. Sorry but I don't know another word. to explain. So when man is in bliss and when he's sort of like in unconscious like condition and when he doesn't really understand everything clearly, and if an agent asks questions like the answer should be yes or no. So it's simple question. Have you met this guy? Oh, by the way, have you met that guy? Oh, by the way, do you know, is it like this or like this? How many, like that much or like that much? So just a little, like 2-3 simple questions. Most likely he would tell you, because like just before ejaculation or just after, this is that, period of that very vulnerable moment. So here you go. She got the information. She'll pass it to the commander.
Man, what a great interview this was. And we can see an example of Chinese intelligence doing exactly this with known Honeypot agent Christine Fang. She developed relationships with several up-and-coming U.S. politicians, including current U.S. Representative Eric Swalwell, pictured here with Fang when he was a city councilman. She also developed sexual relationships with several U.S. politicians, including Fremont, California Mayor Bill Harrison. I mean, come on. And guys, it's not just our politicians who are vulnerable, it's also our tech sector. A recent article in the Times highlighted the problem of Chinese nationals coming to Silicon Valley and trying to seduce our tech nerds to steal the valuable intellectual property from these tech companies and bring them to China. And this isn't always a one-night stand situation. In some cases, these agents are marrying and having children with these tech nerds and then passing on the intellectual property data to the Chinese government. Here is Aliia Roza talking about exactly this.
I know a lot of females having these situations. So they would particularly target American men from California, from Silicon Valley, in order to move to America, get married, have kids with them. And then, who knows, maybe still deliver some information to the government.
How many spies do you think are over there?
A lot.
How many countries?
How many countries? Like from different, definitely. Okay, so I spoke with one person I mentioned before, mostly China, because Chinese are particularly targeting the IP, intellectual property from the American companies.
Kind of makes you wonder about Mark Zuckerberg, huh? Imagine finding out that your wife of however many years was actually working for the intelligence agency of a foreign adversarial government. I mean, my goodness. Even Albert Einstein, a man whose name is synonymous with intelligence in America, was compromised by a KGB agent in the 1930s. Her name was Margarita Konnikova. Now, Aliia does go on in this interview to say that it's not always so malicious on the part of these women, that sometimes their families back home are under threat, and if they don't cooperate with their government, if they don't spy on their husband essentially for the government, their families could be in jeopardy of going to prison or getting murdered. So how bad is this problem of sexual blackmail and sexual compromise among politicians and intellectual property theft among our tech nerds in Silicon Valley? Well, by its very nature, we don't know. I mean, people that are blackmailed or compromised aren't going to come out and tell you. The agents that are doing it aren't going to tell you either. Sometimes we get windows into it, like the Tucker Carlson interview with Tim Burchett. And Burchett, he says in that interview, caught a lot of shit for coming out and talking about this. Members of Congress don't like that this stuff is out. They don't want the American people knowing just how compromised a lot of them are. But I think you can now see that this is a pretty big problem in America. And are you ready for a hot take on how we can fix this? Well, we could just stop with the pearl clutching and go ahead and legalize prostitution. As you might have guessed from my background here, I am a libertarian, and I do think that if there is no victim, there is no crime. If two consenting adults, both agree to something, why make it illegal? It's just part of a broader American attitude where people want to police their neighbors and enforce their own morality on others. And this is a relatively modern phenomenon. The founding fathers of our country largely viewed prostitution as a necessary evil. They didn't advocate for it, but they tolerated it. George Washington himself paid prostitutes at his time as a young officer during the French Indian Wars. And I'm sure there are some people who are rushing to the comments to tell me how stupid this is and how much of a moral degradation it is and blah, blah, blah. I really don't care, because the other option is we continue with the status quo and we allow our politicians to be blackmailed and owned by foreign governments, foreign intelligence services, Israel, Russia, China, and we allow our tech nerds to have their intellectual property stolen by adversarial foreign governments. And the AI race is on, guys, okay? These AI companies that we have here in America are competing directly with Chinese AI companies. We have to have the upper hand if we want to be a continued military superpower in the next few decades. So maybe let's grow the hell up, stop with the pearl clutching, and let our politicians have a little bit of fun after work, huh?